The heavy steel door slammed shut, echoing through the empty 300,000 square foot facility. Marcus sat on the oil-stained concrete floor, his hands covered in dark grease, his head wedged beneath the secondary drive assembly of a $2 million automated milling machine. Above him, 12 expensive diagnostic monitors blinked red, flashing a permanent catastrophic error code. Billionaire CEO Arthur Vance stood 5 feet away, his arms folded across his chest, his tailored coat smelling of expensive cigar smoke and crisp morning air. He stared down at the 19-year-old black intern lying in the dirt at 4 in the morning. 12 senior engineers with master's degrees stood in this exact spot 3 hours ago, Arthur said, his voice cold, sharp, and cut with exhausted anger. They signed the decommission order. They declared this entire assembly dead. You have 5 minutes to tell me why you're wasting my time before security escorts you off my property. Marcus didn't panic. He didn't scramble to his feet. He gently rested the side of his head against the cold steel housing, closed his eyes, and listened to the faint, irregular hum of the cooling pump. Marcus whispered, his voice steady in the dark. They listened with their screens. They didn't listen to the iron. Marcus reached for his grandfather's battered wooden toolbox, pulling out a $43 copper relief valve. He had no idea that in 20 minutes, that tiny piece of metal would shatter a corporate hierarchy and change his family's legacy forever. 10 miles away, in a small, quiet house on the south side of Chicago, an old wooden clock chimed on a worn kitchen table. That house was built on decades of silent, unyielding sacrifice. Marcus grew up watching 2 people build a fortress out of sheer dignity. His grandmother, Evelyn, spent 42 years cleaning hotel rooms downtown. Her hands were scarred by harsh bleach, her knees swollen from hours on cold tile floors, but her back was always straight. Every dollar she earned was carefully divided into paper envelopes, one for rent, one for groceries, and one labeled Marcus's future. She never bought herself new clothes, wearing the same faded winter coat for over a decade so Marcus would never lack books or tools. In the backyard shed, his grandfather, Thomas, taught Marcus a different kind of wisdom. Thomas was a brilliant self-taught mechanic who was denied engineering jobs in the 1970s because of the color of his skin. Instead of growing bitter, Thomas built a reputation as the only man in the neighborhood who could fix engines that commercial shops declared junk. Thomas didn't use fancy computer diagnostics. He used a wooden screwdriver pressed against his ear to feel vibrations inside a motor. On the lid of his old wooden toolbox, he stuck a piece of yellow masking tape with 2 words written in sharp black ink. Listen first. Computers tell you what failed, Marcus, Thomas would say, placing his calloused hand over his grandson's small fingers. Sensors only react to damage after it happens, but the metal itself will tell you where it hurts long before it breaks. Never let a man with a diploma convince you that a machine is dead just because he doesn't know how to hear it speak. Marcus carried those words like sacred armor. When he earned a competitive summer internship at Vance Defense Dynamics, he quickly realized that having hands-on wisdom in a room of arrogant credentials made him an instant target. Vance Defense Dynamics was preparing to deliver its largest defense contract of the decade, a $40 million component order for the military. Everything depended on Machine 11, a massive, custom-built German milling unit that carved titanium radar housings with sub-millimeter precision. At midnight, Machine 11 ground to a sudden, shrieking halt. The main spindle seized. The primary computer threw a fatal system error, locking out the entire assembly line. Within 30 minutes, the lead plant engineer, Dr. Harrington, gathered a team of 12 senior specialists around the diagnostic terminals. They plugged in high-end laptops, ran complex algorithmic simulations, and analyzed digital telemetry. After 3 hours of arguing, calculating, and shifting blame, Dr. Harrington threw his digital stylus onto the control desk. "The main drive shaft is warped," Harrington announced loudly. addressing the exhausted shift supervisors. The internal friction destroyed the secondary housing. It's a complete mechanical failure. We need to order a replacement module from Munich. It will take 3 weeks and cost $700,000. The delay meant failing the government contract. It meant tens of millions in penalties and massive layoffs across the plant floor. Standing in the back of the room, Marcus stepped forward, his canvas work pants looking completely out of place among the pristine lab coats. He looked at the digital schematics, then at the physical machine. "It's not the drive shaft," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise. "The shaft is fine. It's a pressure lock in the thermal bypass valve. The sensor is reading heat that isn't there because fluid can't cycle back." Dr. Harrington turned around, his face flushing with red anger. He looked at Marcus's intern badge, scoffed, and adjusted his designer glasses. "Son, I have a doctorate in mechanical engineering from MIT. My team has 70 years of combined experience. You pack auto parts in the tool room. Go sweep the loading dock and let the adult handle millions of dollars in equipment." The room erupted in quiet chuckles. Marcus didn't argue. He picked up his wooden toolbox, turned on his heel, and walked out into the dark. But he wasn't going home. While the engineering team filed into the executive suite to draft a multi-million-dollar loss report, Marcus waited until the main floor cleared. At 3 in the morning, under the dim yellow emergency lights, he walked back to Machine 11. He climbed beneath the iron beast, shedding his safety vest. He laid his cheek flat against a heavy cast iron housing and tapped the secondary manifold with a small brass hammer. He listened to the pitch of the echo, just as his grandfather had taught him in that small backyard shed. Clang, clang, thud. The sound was dull, a blockage. A simple $43 mechanical relief valve was stuck closed, tricking the computer into thinking the entire engine was melting down. 12 senior engineers had trusted a flashing screen over basic mechanical physics. Marcus pulled a spare universal relief valve out of his grandfather's wooden box and began unbolting the housing. That was the exact moment the heavy factory doors swung open and Arthur Vance stepped onto the floor. Now, standing in the cold dawn light, Arthur looked at his watch. 5 minutes had passed. "Your time is up, kid," Arthur said, taking out his cell phone to call security. "Put the tools back." "Turn the main breaker on, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, crawling out from under the machine, his face smeared with grease, his eyes wide and completely unshakable. "Press the green start switch on panel 4. Arthur froze, holding his phone inches from his ear. The silence in the giant warehouse was deafening. Arthur stared into the young man's eyes, seeing a depth of quiet confidence that no executive in his boardrooms had ever displayed. Without a word, Arthur walked over to panel 4 and slammed his palm onto the main power toggle. The giant control panel hummed to life. Digital displays flashed green across the board. Arthur held his breath and pressed the primary start button. Deep inside the belly of Machine 11, a low, smooth hydraulic whine built into a powerful rhythmic roar. The massive titanium spindle spun up to 12,000 revolutions per minute, gliding across its steel tracks with absolute, flawless perfection. The machine wasn't dead. It was running better than the day it was installed. Arthur stood paralyzed, staring at the digital output monitors. The diagnostic screen read, "System operational, efficiency 100%. Behind them, the glass elevator doors opened. Dr. Harrington and his team of 12 engineers walked onto the factory floor, holding coffee cups and folders containing the multi-million-dollar replacement order. They stopped dead in their tracks, their mouths dropping open as the deafening roar of Machine 11 echoed through the rafters. Dr. Harrington rushed forward, his face pale as paper. "What? How is this running? Mr. Vance, we didn't authorize a reboot. The dry shaft was destroyed." Arthur slowly turned around. He looked at Dr. Harrington, then down at the small, greasy $43 copper valve sitting on the steel workbench next to a worn wooden toolbox. "The drive shaft was never broken, Harrington." Arthur said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly quiet tone. Your credentials broke. Your pride broke. This 19-year-old intern fixed in 20 minutes what 12 of my highest-paid executives couldn't understand in 4 hours. Harrington opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The entire morning shift was now watching, silent as statues, as the dynamic inside the billion-dollar company completely inverted. That afternoon, Arthur Vance called an emergency assembly in the central atrium. Hundreds of employees, executives, and factory line workers stood shoulder to shoulder under the high glass ceilings. Arthur stepped up to the microphone, holding a piece of paper. He officially stripped Dr. Harrington of his head managerial role, reassigning him to basic oversight. Then, Arthur called Marcus up to the stage. Vance Defense Dynamics was built on the promise of excellence, Arthur spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing across the room. Today, I learned that real excellence doesn't come from a title or a pedigree. It comes from character. It comes from the willingness to listen when everyone else is shouting. Arthur handed Marcus a folder. Inside was a full university scholarship covering 4 years of advanced engineering, a permanent position as assistant director of plant operations, and a check that would change his family's lives forever. 2 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday morning, a sleek black town car pulled up to a small, modest home on the south side of Chicago. Marcus stepped out of the back seat, holding a massive box wrapped in silk ribbon. He walked up the porch steps, where his grandmother Evelyn sat in her rocking chair, her worn hands resting in her lap. Marcus knelt beside her, placed the box on her knees, and helped her open it. Inside was a brand new, hand-tailored Sunday dress, paired with a letter confirming that her mortgage had been paid off in full, and a formal retirement certificate from her cleaning company. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at her grandson. Marcus took her worn, calloused hands, the hands that had cleaned 40 years of other people's mess so he could stand tall, and pressed them against his cheek. Behind them, standing in the doorway of the small shed, his grandfather Thomas smiled quietly, holding his old wooden toolbox. True mastery is never given by a title, nor can it be stripped away by prejudice. It is built in the dark, refined through sacrifice, and proven when the world finally stops talking and learns to listen.